Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The Shiur is Leiluy Nishmat, Daniella, Shaina, Aleha Hashalom, Bas Yehoshua, Falik, Sheyichyeh, where Neshama should have an Aliyah, an Allah Yidin Ayashia. Today was actually Tu B'Shvat. I forgot to mention that in this morning's Shiur. But Tu B'Shvat, of course, the rabbis tell us is Rosh Hashanah Lilanis, the new year for trees. So please God, Hashem should bless us all with a fruitful year and a prosperous year and a year filled with brachas and simchas. At this point, over these couple of weeks, in the evening Shiur, we usually study together one of Rashi's commentaries in the Parsha, and I'd like to do the same this week. So if you have a Chumash in front of you, I'm going to be studying a Rashi in the beginning of Perek Yudalid, that is chapter 14. We'll start from the beginning. The Rashi I want to focus on is on Pasuk Gimel. So the story here is that the Jewish people have finally left Egypt, and they've actually been banished from Egypt by Paro himself, and they find themselves in the wilderness, in the desert. They've been out of Egypt only for a couple of days. Perek Yudalid Pasuk Aleph, Vayidaber Hashem al Moshe Leimer, and Hashem spoke to Moshe. Daber al Bnei Yisrael, Hashem tells Moshe, tell the Jews, speak to the Jewish people, v'yoshuvu, and they should actually turn around and start returning towards Egypt. V'yachanu lifnei pi hachiros, and camp in a place called pi hachiros, bein Migdol u'bein Hayom, lifnei Baal Tzifoin nichachos sachanu al Hayom. B'omar Paroi livnei Yisrael, and Paroi, says Hashem to Moshe, will say to the Jewish people, nevuchim heim ba'oretz, they are confused in the land. They're confused in their travel. Sogar aleim amidbar, the desert is closing in on them, and the Jewish people are lost in the desert. So what's going on here is that Hashem is devising a plan in which he's going to lure Paroi out of Mitzrayim, in which he's going to lure the entire Egyptian army out of Egypt to come and chase the Jews. Of course, the ultimate plan is to bring the Egyptian army, including Paro himself, to the banks of the Reed Sea, to the banks of the Yam Suf, and there, of course, the great miracle of the splitting of the sea would take place. The Jewish people would be saved, the Egyptians would be drowned, etc., etc. But in devising this plan, Hashem tells Moshe to speak to the Jewish people and to tell them to actually turn around, v'yashuvu, to turn around and to travel backwards, camp in a different place. And Paro is going to assume when he hears about this that the Jewish people are lost, the Jewish people are confused, they've lost their way in the desert. Now, how is Paro going to know which way the Jewish people are traveling? How is Paro going to know what's going on? So again, as we spoke in the previous shiurim at length, the deal here is, the official deal is, that the Jews are only going to leave Mitzrayim for 3 days. Well, they're going to travel for 3 days. They're going to offer up a sacrifice. They're going to worship their God, and then they're going to come back to Egypt. Paro, in fact, as Rashi says in a different Rashi, Paro, in fact, sent spies, sent some secret agents together with the Jewish people to keep tabs on them, to make sure that they would, in fact, do as it is that they said they would do. They would, go for 3 days, go and daven, do their thing, offer up sacrifices, and then come back. So be it as it may, Paro has his own software system of how he's keeping tabs on the Jewish people and what goes on with them. And so Hashem says, I anticipate that as the Jews begin to travel in the wrong direction, word is going to get back to Paro that the Jewish people are wandering, they're floundering around in the desert. Omar Paro Pasuk Gimel, and Paro will say, Livnei Yisrael, to the Jews, nevuchim heim ba'oretz, they're confused in the land. Sogar aleim amidbar, the desert is, so to speak, closing in on them, meaning to say the desert is captured them and they've lost their way. The desert has the upper hand over them. Now here for tonight, let's focus on one Rashi. One Rashi, it's the second Rashi on Pasuk Gimel. Rashi says, Omar Paro will say when he'll hear that the Jewish people have turned around and traveled backwards, Paro will say, and Rashi picks up the words from the Pasuk, Libnei Yisrael, to the Jewish people. Says Rashi in context, when it says, the Pasuk says that Paro will say to the Jewish people, it doesn't mean that Paro is going to talk to the Jewish people, because of course there are no Jewish people to talk to. The Jewish people have left Egypt. those that have left. And those that haven't left, have passed on during the 3 days of darkness. So there's no Jewish people to talk to. The literal translation of the words V'omar Paroi Livnei Yisrael is that Paroi will say to the Jews, but Paroi obviously isn't going to talk to the Jews because there's no Jews to talk to. The Jews are either dead in the ground during the plague of darkness, or they've left Egypt and they're about a 3 days travel out of Egypt, out of Mitzrayim. So what does the Torah mean when the Torah says that Paroi will say to the Jews? Says Rashi, it doesn't mean to the Jews, but rather it means al b'nei Yisrael. It means about the Jews. And Rashi proceeds to bring different examples from Psukim, where the word, with the letter lamed, as in the context livnei Yisrael, which usually means to the Jews, can be understood to refer to not to the Jews, but about the Jews, right? One example, another example actually is from a couple of Psukim from now. Later on in Perek Yudalet, Pasuk Yudalet, Moshe tells the Jews, Hashem yilochem lochem. Hashem yilochem lochem literally translates to Hashem will fight to you. Obviously, Moshe wasn't telling the Jews that God was going to fight against them. It means Hashem was going to fight for them. Hashem yilochem lochem, God will fight, will wage the war on your behalf. So it is over here, says Rashi. The Torah says, V'amar Paroi libnei Yisrael. Paroi is going to say to the Jews. It doesn't mean to the Jews. It means Paroi is going to talk to his men. Paroi is going to talk to his advisors. Paroi is going to talk to his military people. Paroi is going to talk to his cabinet. He's going to talk to them about the Jews. V'amar Paroi libnei Yisrael. This is what Rashi says. At least this is the part I want to deal with, I want to talk about for now. So again, Hashem is anticipating that as the Jews turn around and travel backwards in the desert, Paroi is going to get wind of the fact that the Jews are floundering, seem to have lost the sense of direction. V'omar Paroi, and Paroi will say to his men, to his advisors, to his cabinet members, to his government, to his military, Livnei Yisrael, concerning the Jews, Nevuchem heim ba'aretz, that they, the Jews, are lost in the land, and Sagar aleim hamidbar, the desert has closed in on them. This is Rashi's interpretation. Now, what is there to talk about this? The Rashi seems straightforward and relatively simple. However, this is not the only interpretation of these words. There is what's called Targumionis ben Uziel, one of the translations of the Torah. We have one of the Torah translations of the Torah, one of the translations given by a rabbinically accepted authority, dates back approximately 2,000 years to an individual called Yonasan ben Uziel. The Gemara has wonderful things to say about Yonasan ben Uziel, the tzaddik that he was, the great Torah scholar that he was, to the extent the Gemara says when he studied Torah outdoors, if any bird flew overhead, from the great kedusha, from the great fervor of his learning, the bird would burst into flames as it flew on top of the head of Yonasan ben Uziel. Either way, be it as it may, there is Targum Yonasan ben Uziel, a translation written by Yonasan ben Uziel, which is accepted by the rabbis, by the Mishnah, by the Gemara as one of the interpretations, one of the reliable interpretations of the Torah. Although in general it's just a translation, but you know how it is with translation. There's no such thing as an exact translation. Every translation puts its own commentary to one degree or another. So in many places there is insight and interpretation on the Psukim on how to understand them from Targum Yonasan ben Uziel. And this pasuk is no exception. On the words V'omar Paroi libnei Yisrael, Paroi said to the Jewish people, the Targum Yonasan ben Uziel translates these words and says something astounding. Libnei Yisrael, to the Jewish people, says Targum Yonasan ben Uziel, is meant to be understood literally, not like Rashi. It doesn't mean that Paroi would talk to Egyptians about the Jews. It means Paroi would talk to Jews. Literally, V'omar Paroi, and Paroi will say, Libnei Yisrael, to the Jews. Which Jews would Paroi be talking to? Targum Yonasan ben Uziel says these words, L'doson va'aviram de'ishtayru b'mitzrayim. L'doson va'aviram de'ishtayru b'mitzrayim. Says Targum Yonasan ben Uziel, Hashem is telling Moshe, when Paroi will hear that the Jewish people have lost their way, apparently when the word will reach Paroi, that the Jews have apparently lost their way in the desert, Paro is going to speak to the Jews about the Jews. And Paro is going to say, the Jewish nation got lost. But which Jews is Paro going to speak to? To whom is he going to speak? The Jews who wanted to leave Egypt have left, and the Jews that didn't want to leave Egypt are all dead. Who's he going to speak to? So Targumionis ben Uziel drops this bomb, that there were two Jews in the twilight zone, that there were two Jews who managed to slip through the cracks. They didn't die in the plague of darkness, and they also didn't leave Egypt. Who were these two Jews? Datan and Aviram. Datan and Aviram, these two characters, these two troublemakers, who crop up at every interesting point in Jewish history, at least in these stories in Chumash. Every time there is a crisis, Datan and Aviram are involved. Here they rear their heads once again. Datan and Aviram will remain in Mitzrayim, and Paro is going to say to Datan and Aviram, the Jewish people got lost in the desert, and so they are confused. All right, again, it's an original interpretation. To the best of our knowledge, the Yonasan ben Uziel, this translation doesn't take it from it's not a Midrash, it's not recorded anywhere else, but there it is in the targeted translation of Yonasan ben Uziel, that Paro is going to speak to Datan and Aviram, who somehow slip through the cracks. They don't die in the plague of darkness, and they don't leave Egypt together with the Jews. Okay. Now there are two problems, there are two challenges in understanding this translation of Yonasan, this interpretation of Yonasan ben Uziel, that Datan and Aviram remain behind in Mitzrayim. The obvious problem, the obvious question is, how did they manage to slip through the cracks? If they didn't want to leave Egypt, they should have died in the plague of darkness. And if they wanted to leave Egypt, they should have left together with the Jews. That's the obvious problem. All right, that problem seems relatively easy to solve. Maybe they originally wanted to leave Egypt, but then they changed their minds. Maybe, when they saw the Jewish people leaving, they didn't trust Moshe Rabbeinu. Perhaps they wanted to leave at the beginning, but somehow at the end they got cold feet. Be it as it may, they slipped through the cracks. But there's a much bigger challenge in understanding this interpretation of Yonasan ben Uziel, and that is this. Later on in Chumash, we will learn, in fact, later on in this week's Parsha, we're going to learn that the Jewish people, after a certain amount of time of them being in the desert, they ran out of food. The food they had brought with them from Mitzrayim ran out. Now, you know what happens to Jews when they run out of food? They get cranky. You don't want to be around with Jews when they run out of food. So they come to Moshe Rabbeinu, and to cut a long story short, because you all know it, man comes down from heaven, and a beautiful arrangement is organized where Moshe tells the Jews, man is going to stay over fresh man is going to fall fresh from the heavens every single day. You should not store man from one day to the other. And the Torah tells us that all the Jewish people listened to the instructions of Hashem and Moshe Rabbeinu. Nobody left man over from one day to the next, except two Jews. And you guessed it, they were Datan and Aviram. They did leave over man from one day to the next, and Hashem made a miracle that it rotted and that it disintegrated, that it went off and it wasn't edible the next day, to teach the Jews the lesson that you have to follow instructions, and man is collected every morning from fresh. Okay, we don't store, in this case, Hashem wanted the Jews not to store food from one day to the next, which is in itself a challenge for Jews. The only exception is Friday, when a double portion of man fell, etc., etc., etc. Wait a second, say the commentaries. 1 second. How do Datan and Aviram show up at the story of the falling of the man? How are they with the Jews? The story of the falling of the man happens weeks later, after the Jewish people have left Egypt. How do Datan and Aviram show up with the Jews by the story of the falling of the man if Datan and Aviram were left in Mitzrayim? Paro was actually talking to them about the Jews who apparently were lost in the wilderness. So how did they manage to rejoin the Jewish people? Now, if they would have gone with the Egyptians to chase the Jewish people, then it seems they would have met the same watery grave that all the Egyptians met, because as the Jewish people crossed the Yam Suf and got out the other end, the water collapses over Egypt, over the Egyptians and all of their men, and they all drown. All the Egyptians drowned. And yet Datan and Aviram somehow make it out. Datan and Aviram somehow are saved. In fact, later on, when it comes to the story of Korach, the Torah says, Vayikach Korach gathers a group of followers to stage his rebellion against Moshe Rabbeinu. And guess who was part of Korach's rebellion against Moshe? Come on, guess it out loud. Datan and Aviram. In fact, it was at that point in the story of Korach that Datan and Aviram do finally meet their end, and they are swallowed up in the ground together with Korach and his family, where they eventually perish. But the commentaries struggle with this. They say, wait a second. If Datan and Aviram were left in Mitzrayim, even after the Jews left Mitzrayim, then at what point, how do they gain access? How do they get back to the Jewish people, to the Jewish nation? How do they rejoin them to enable them to get them on and leave it over from one day to the next, to be involved in all the stories they're involved with until eventually in the end, to even be part of the rebellion of Korach. To be part of the rebellion of Korach, they obviously had to be present together with the Jews. But how do they get there? How do they get to the Jews? How do they physically get to the Jews if they were left in Mitzrayim when the Jews left Mitzrayim? And again, even if we accept that when the Egyptians chased after the Jews, Datan and Aviram went along together with them, but that would still mean that they were in the Egyptian camp. And if they were in the Egyptian camp, then the Egyptians were not saved at the experience of the Yam Suf. The water collapses on them. So how do Datan and Aviram survive not the miracle of the splitting of the sea, but the miracle of the collapsing of the sea that fell on the head of the entire Egyptian army, apparently including Datan and Aviram? And yet they obviously did, because they made it to the other end. And they once again joined the Jewish nation. How did this happen? So the commentaries explain that there is, like every big story, there is, you got to read the small script, right? You got to read the small print. There is an amazing epilogue to the story of the splitting of the sea. Actually, a mind-boggling postscript to the story of the splitting of the sea. And apparently, as it turns out, according to these commentaries, we only heard half the story. What's the full story? Well, the story as we know it is that the sea split, the Jews crossed, right? The Jews went through, the Egyptian army went in, the sea collapsed, and all the Egyptians drowned. Yes? Apparently, that's not the full story. Apparently, after the sea collapsed and all the Egyptians drowned, the sea split a second time. And Datan and Aviram emerged intact and rejoined the Jewish nation. It turns out in the end, Hashem split the sea. This is how you have to say pshat. You have to learn this way. It turns out Hashem split the sea twice. The first time Hashem split the sea was for the 2 or 3 million Jews who split the sea and sang Shiur and praised Hashem and sang and danced and did all the wonderful things. The second time Hashem split the sea, it was after it had collapsed over the entire Egyptian regime. It split again so that these two bulvanim, these two troublemakers, Datan and Aviram, could emerge from the sea a second time and rejoin the Jewish people. For the sake of this discussion, I don't want to get into this part too much at length, but if you take a few minutes after the Shiur and you review the Psukim in Parshas Beshalach, you can see that the Torah actually tells the story of the splitting of the sea twice. The Torah, there's a whole section which is basically repeated before the actual song, before the song that the Yidden sing. There's a series of psukim describing how Hashem split the sea, etc., etc. The Torah tells the story twice. And one of the explanations for why the Torah tells the story twice, according to this insight, is because it actually happened twice. The first time for the Jewish nation, the second time for Datan and Aviram. I just want to say this. One of the verses that the Torah repeats is V'hamayim lohem choyma miminam u'mismoilam, that as the Jews crossed the sea, the water stood up for the Jewish people, choyma as a wall, miminam u'mismoilam on the right and on the left. This verse appears twice in the Pesukim. Excuse me. The second time the verse appears, the word choyma is written without a vav. On this, the Midrash says, don't read it choyma as a wall, but read it chema as fury. What's the fury? The angels in heaven, says the Midrash, were furious with Hashem for splitting the sea. And they said to Hashem, why are you drowning the Egyptians and saving the Jews? The Jews don't deserve to be saved. According to this interpretation, the idea that the word chayma, wall, is written without a vav and can be read as chayma, anger, the idea that this is true only in the second pasuk, the second time the verse is stated, not the first time, gets a new meaning. Because the first time the Torah is talking about the water being a wall on the right and the left, we're talking about all 12 tribes. Among them, there were great tzaddikim. The angels had no issue with the fact that Hashem split the sea the first time. But the second time they watched the sea split, for Datan and Aviram to walk through, we can understand the angels were infuriated. Says the Midrash, it wasn't just a chayma, it wasn't just a wall, it was chayma, it was anger. The Malachim looked down from heaven and said, Ribono shel Olam, for these two chevra, what are you doing? Why are you splitting the sea for them? V'hamayim lohem chayma, there was an element of fury here. When the angels in heaven watched as Datan and Aviram miraculously emerged from the sea to rejoin the Jewish people. This is, again, according to the Targumionis and Ben Uziel, that Datan and Aviram remained behind in Mitzrayim after the Jewish people left. This is how you have to learn in order to justify and explain how Datan and Aviram once again are reunited with the Jewish people in many of their experiences post the splitting of the sea. After they had emerged from the Yam Suf, Datan and Aviram, they were there by Matan Torah, they were there by the Egel Azov, they were there by all of the experiences that the Jewish people, all the stories, until eventually they ended up in the ground together with Kairach. But here there is, okay, so this is the answer that's given. The question is, how did Datan and Aviram end up with the Jewish people? And the answer is Hashem split the sea for them specially, and they were able to emerge from the collapse of the water on top of the Egyptians. Datan and Aviram are able to emerge. But the question, of course, is why? Why would Hashem do a special miracle, make a special miracle like that for Datan and Aviram? I mean, these guys are the picture of trouble, right? Remember, they're the first ones to wrestle with each other, to wrestle with Moshe Rabbeinu. They were the ones who informed on Moshe Rabbeinu to Paroi. Paroi tried to kill Moshe Rabbeinu because of Datan and Aviram's report, who had informed Paroi that Moshe killed an Egyptian. Right? You can just imagine from Moshe Rabbeinu's perspective, from the Jewish people's perspective, right? Imagine this. They've just experienced the splitting of the sea. They look out, all the Egyptians are dead, all their troubles are behind them. You know, it's like, it's as good as the day can be. And then all of a sudden the sea splits again. And out from the sea comes Datan and Aviram. I just imagine the look on Moshe Rabbeinu's face and the Jewish people's face. But Moshe specifically, who knows these two guys and the troublemakers there are, Moshe already has a history with them. They were the first Jews who introduced him to what it was like in dealing with Jewish politics. And after Moshe thought all the Jews are saved and all the Egyptians are dead and all the troublemakers are gone, the sea splits again. And there come Datan and Aviram. But just for a couple of minutes, why? Why did Datan and Aviram merit such an incredible miracle? Why did Datan and Aviram merit to be saved? Did they want to leave Egypt or not? Apparently they didn't want to leave Egypt. then they should have died in the plague of darkness like everybody else. They didn't die in the plague of darkness. They end up going with the Egyptians to chase the Jews, and Hashem saves them again. Why is this? What special zechus do they have to deserve to be saved in this way, in such a miraculous fashion? Okay, so here again, the commentaries call on us to delve into the verses, to delve into the Pesukim and the Rashis on the verses, and to understand a little more, to scratch the surface of who these individuals, Datan and Aviram, were. Okay, it turns out, if you look at the final Pesukim in Parshas Shmos, the Torah, I'm going back now 3 parshas to the original Parshas Shmos, the first parsha in Chumash Shmos. At the end of the parsha, the Torah tells us there was something called Shoitrei B'nai Yisrael. Shoitrei B'nai Yisrael means Jewish policemen. Who were these Jewish policemen? They were not regular Jewish workers. These were individuals who were in charge of the Jewish workers. So every Jewish policeman had under him X amount of Jews, and the Shoitrei B'nai Yisrael, the Jewish police, were in charge of making sure that the Jewish workers carried out their work and did what they had to do. At the end of Parshas Shmos, Pari, of course, very famously, starts to withhold grain, starts to withhold the teven, the ingredients that the Jewish people need in order to make bricks. Pari starts to withhold it. And Pari still, although he's withholding these ingredients, is still expecting the Jews to produce the same amount of bricks. So the Torah says, Vayuku shoitrei b'nai Yisrael. When the Jews were obviously not producing the same amount of bricks as they were on the days before when the materials were given to them, so shoitrei b'nai Yisrael, the Jewish policemen, were beaten. Why were they beaten? They were beaten for not beating their brothers, the Jews, and forcing them to work harder and produce the same amount of bricks. These Jewish policemen were being beaten by the Egyptians because they were not pushing the Jews to work and produce the same amount of bricks at the time that they were not being given the material, the same amount as when they did produce the material. So the Torah says like this. The Torah says that these policemen went to Paroi to complain. And they said to Paroi, Lomo sasa koil avadecha, why are you doing this to us? Teven, the straw, the material that we need, you're not giving to us. And you're expecting us to produce the same amount of bricks. It's not possible. Everybody's getting beat. We're all getting beat up. We cannot work this way. They said to Paro, it's not worth it for you. You have good workers. Why are you beating us up? Be realistic with us, and we'll do our best. We'll work for you. Why are you making unrealistic demands? The Shoitrei B'nai Yisrael, the Jewish policemen who were in charge of their brothers, the Jews, go to Paro. They try to reason with him. Have a heart, they say. Forget a heart. They say to Paro, just be logical. So Paroi turns to these Jewish policemen and says, it's your fault. You guys are a bunch of lazy bones people. You have this idea in your head that you want to leave Egypt and you want to go serve Hashem. So it's your fault. It's because you're lazy. I realize, says Paroi, that your motivation to go serve Hashem is laziness. So I'm teaching you a lesson. Forget this idea. I'm trying to rid you of your laziness that's motivating you to get this idea in your head that you want to leave Egypt and go serve Hashem. Now, of course, this proposal that the Jews should leave Egypt and go serve Hashem never came from the Jewish people. Never came from the Shoichid, never came from the policemen. It came from Moshe and Aaron. Moshe and Aaron were the ones who were telling Paro it's time for the Jewish people to go serve Hashem. So the policemen are being punished. The policemen and the Jews are being punished and physically beaten for the conversations that are taking place between Moshe and Aaron and Paroi. The Torah describes the following scene. The Torah describes that as the policemen are leaving Paroi from an unsuccessful conversation with him, they're trying to get Paroi to loosen the load, and Paroi blames them for what Moshe and Aaron did and what Moshe and Aaron said, and Paroi won't hear of it. As the policemen are leaving Paro's presence, Moshe and Aaron are arriving. They cross paths. Vayivga'u es Moshe ves Aaron. They literally meet. Moshe and Aaron are coming in to tell Parai to let the Jewish people go. And the policemen are leaving Parai after not succeeding at getting permission from Parai to lighten the load. So a conversation takes place, but a short conversation takes place between the policemen and Moshe and Aaron as they cross paths at Parai's at the threshold of Parai's palace. And the policemen say to Moshe and Aaron, Yeira Hashem aleichem v'yishpoit. May Hashem see what you did, what you, Moshe and Aaron, did, and may Hashem judge you. Asher hivashtem esreichenu, you've given us a foul odor in the eyes of Parai, in the eyes of his servants, to give them a sword, to give a sword in their hand to kill us. The Shoitrei B'nai Yisrael, these Jewish policemen, they blame Moshe and Aaron. They say to them, what are you doing? You're talking about freedom, but you're producing a reality where the slavery is getting worse. Okay. The Torah does not tell us if Moshe and Aaron answered or what they answered, just the complaint that the Jewish policemen have against Moshe and Aaron. And here there is a wild, wild Rashi. On the words, Vayifka'u es Moshe ves Aaron, the Jewish policemen meet Moshe and Aaron as they were leaving. The Pasuk describes them as nitzavim lekrosam, standing there to greet them. Standing there to greet them. Says Rashi, which Jewish policeman spoke to Moshe and Aaron this way? Which Jewish policeman told Moshe and Aaron that God should see what you did and judge you and hold you responsible for what it is that you did? Who spoke this way to Moshe and Aaron? Says Rashi, the word nitzavim tells us exactly who it was. You know who it was? Datan and Aviram. Turns out, Datan and Aviram weren't stam regular citizens. Datan and Aviram were among the Shaitrim. Datan and Aviram were among the Jewish policemen. They also had positions of responsibility where they were responsible over fellow Jews. Datan and Aviram were among the Shoitrei B'nai Yisrael who were responsible for the work of their fellow Jews. And they were the ones who once again opened their mouths to Moshe and Aaron and said, you're making this worse for us. May Hashem see what you've done and judge you for it. Okay. So Datan and Aviram were among the Shoitrei B'nai Yisrael. Now the Shoitrei B'nai Yisrael, often when people think of these Shoitrim, these Jewish prisoners, the image or the word that comes to mind is kapos. But unlike the kapos, who unfortunately many times in many cases had their actions and the way they conducted themselves, they had a terrible reputation. In the case of the Shoitrei B'nai Yisrael, in the case of the Jewish policemen in Mitzrayim, the Torah gives them credit for taking beatings on behalf of their fellow Jews, whom they, the policemen, refused or did their best to protect them. They took the beatings rather than the Jews because they didn't want to beat their fellow Jews. They didn't want to push them. They didn't want to force them into harsher labor than they thought was healthy. In fact, my dear friends, the Shoitrei B'nai Yisrael, the Jewish policemen in the end, were all rewarded for this that they did, for the Mesiras Nefesh, for the self-sacrifice that they had in Mitzrayim. When they took beatings on behalf of their fellow Jew, they were rewarded for it. Once again, Rashi articulates this in Parshas Bamidbar. Vayuku Shoitrei B'nai Yisrael, says Rashi, you know what happened to them in the end? Later on, much later on, in Parshas Bahaloischa, when Moshe tells Hashem, I need 70 elders. When Hashem tells Moshe, gather 70 elders, place your spirit upon them, make the first Sanhedrin, and they will be endowed with the spirit of Moshe. Gather 70 elders, and they will lead the Jewish people. You know which 70 Jews were chosen? The 70 Jews who were Shoitrei B'nai Yisrael. The 70 Jews who were policemen and had self-sacrifice for the sake of their fellow Jews. They were chosen to be the ones to be on Moshe's Sanhedrin of 70 people, and be the first Sanhedrin, receive literally from the spirit of Moshe, and be put in position of Jewish leadership in this way. They were already in position of Jewish leadership. The first time they were put into position of leadership was by the Egyptians in Mitzrayim. As a reward for what they did, they were appointed to be part of Moshe's Bezdin, Moshe's Sanhedrin of 70 people. Conclude the commentaries. The commentaries say, wait a second. Every member of this team of Jewish policemen, every one of these shoitrei b'nei Yisrael who had self-sacrifice and took beatings for the sake of the Jews, just so that they could protect the Jews as much as they can. Every one of them was appointed to the high supreme court of Moshe Rabbeinu as a reward. Every one of them except Datan and Aviram. Datan and Aviram were not around at the time that Moshe made his grand Sanhedrin. Datan and Aviram weren't there at the time that Moshe collected these 70 elders in order for them to sit on his Bezdin and serve. Datan and Aviram, by the time Moshe gathered 70 elders, were dead. They were swallowed in the ground together with Kairach. So what about their reward? What was Datan and Aviram's reward for being prepared to take a beating on behalf of a fellow Jew? Their reward was that Hashem split the sea for them and allowed them to join the Jewish people once more, even after they found themselves among the Egyptians, even after they found themselves in Mitzrayim, left behind after everybody else had left. And the Egyptians literally dragged them out of Mitzrayim when there were no living Jews left there, and dragged them into the sea. And instead of dying in the waves of the Yam Suf, Hashem split the sea for them one more time so that they could rejoin the Jews and be present at the giving of the Torah. And the falling of the Mun, and see all those miracles that befell the Jews after they left Mitzrayim. It turns out Datan and Aviram are complicated figures. Perhaps not the most spiritual, perhaps not the most holy, perhaps not the most learned, perhaps not the picture. When you picture in your mind Datan and Aviram, perhaps you don't picture Jews who are devout. They're not in the box type. They're not the type to follow instructions. You know, they're the two Jews that if Moshe tells all the Yidden, don't leave over Mon from one day to the next, they're the ones who are going to leave it over. But it turns out there's another side to them. And that is that they cared about another Jew. They cared about their fellow Jew. It turns out that when the blows fell, Datan and Aviram positioned themselves and their own backs between the Egyptians and the Jews so they would take the beating rather than the Jews. You know those Jews, I'm sure you know at least one person like this. They're not necessarily the first one to run and study a Blat Gemara. They're not necessarily the first one to run and daven with a minyan. They're not necessarily the first one to run and, make sure that they're eating only shchita that was shechted, but etc. But when they see another Jew in trouble, and when they see another Jew in danger, and when they see there is, God forbid, an anti-Semite who is raising his fist and raising his whip to strike a Jew, this Jew will be the first one to run and position himself right between the bullets and the Jew and say, if you're going to shoot that Jew, you're going to have to shoot me first. That was Datan and Aviram. Yes, they were wild cards. Yes, in the end, they even joined the rebellion of Kairach. No, they're not the picture of tzaddikim, but they knew what it meant to take a beating for the sake of a fellow Jew. And that, my dear friends, in truth, is the real reason why they had an issue with Moshe and Aaron. From day one, when Moshe and Aaron came and things got worse for the Jews, when Moshe and Aaron came with their message of redemption and produced a reality that got worse, Datan and Aviram said, we can't stand this. We can't allow this. Yes, in the end, they'll redeem the Jews. Wonderful. We can't, Datan and Aviram said, we can't get behind leaders who even temporarily are responsible for Jews being beat up and for Jews being treated badly. And for this is an unbelievable story. For this they are rewarded. Perhaps not a very long-lasting reward, but rewarded nonetheless, that Hashem saved them from the split, from after the collapse of the Yam Suf over the Egyptians. Hashem saved them and allowed them to emerge intact and to rejoin the Jewish people. That's the Dvar Torah. I think the lesson is obvious and it's very powerful. And the obvious lesson is that sometimes you look at a Jew and you think to yourself, this guy is a Datan and Aviram, all wrapped in one. You know, Datan and Aviram, these guys are like the characters. They just show up every time there's conflict and every time there's a mess and every time there's a rebellion and every time there's an issue, it's just Datan and Aviram. And you look at them and you go, what's with these guys? What's wrong with them? Can't he just follow instructions? Well, not here to justify the not following of instructions, but it is the Torah's way of telling us that things are never quite as simple as they seem. And even these two troublemakers, and even these two individuals who couldn't follow an instruction, who couldn't resist a rebellion, who joined it and got behind, not only were they troublemakers, when someone else was a troublemaker, they backed him. Yes, the Torah says, but even in their own twisted way, inside them was also a soul that couldn't handle and couldn't bear watching a Jew get beat up. And for this, they were ready to put their own backs in the way and take a beating just in order to protect and save another Yid. And for this, they were rewarded. For this, they were rewarded. Unfortunately, too often we see the other way around. We see people who will run to study, who will run to do a mitzvah, and yet, when it comes to being there to help another Jew, when someone else is in danger, unfortunately, sometimes they're the last ones you can count on. Datan and Aviram are here to remind us. Sometimes the value of a Jew is, are you willing and are you ready to get beat by an Egyptian whip to avoid another Jew getting hurt? Even Datan and Aviram understood and identified and personified this. And for this, they were rewarded in their own special way. May Hashem help us that we always find it in our hearts to have true Ahavas Yisrael, true love for a fellow Jew. And if and when, God forbid, another Jew is in danger, may we always be the first ones to rush in there and be there to protect and to save and to take the beating. God, may Hashem protect us to help another Yid. In that sense, may we learn from the example of Datan and Aviram. Have a wonderful Shabbos.